You want to do the same thing? Just
Alright guys, Murph's here, and today we're going to do a little discussion on whether or not micro compact 9mm are still relevant in today's concealed carry market, I guess we should say. Now, what am I talking about when I say micro compact 9mm? There's a lot of options that we could be looking at right now, and what I specifically want to look at are the single stack 9mm micro compacts that were really popular a couple of years ago. So in order to talk about this, we got to kind of back up things a little bit. The Second Amendment community looked very different just 30 years ago and has changed drastically in the last 20. We've seen a lot of different trends and stuff like that pop up over the last 20 years. A lot of it fueled by people coming back from like the GWAT and stuff like that, bringing their experiences, understanding now that it is very important to be able to provide for your own security and to be able to make sure that you have the tools and the training and the capability to be able to provide for your own security. So this has led to lots of schools, lots of new trainers out there from like every SEAL team, as well as a lot of interest in the civilian market that may not necessarily have ever served, but are still interested in being able to have the same skills as those that did, to be able to try to gain from the experiences of those who have been there and done that. And there's a lot of discussion that in the Second Amendment community about, like LARPers and stuff like that, and the milsim crowd and all those types of things. And I don't necessarily think service is the prerequisite to being able to experience that type of stuff. Like if I see somebody at the range and they're all decked out in like armor and camo and all that kind of stuff, yeah, I do think it's kind of out of place for where it is and for where they are and what it is that they are doing. But if they're actually displaying skills, tactics, techniques, or whatever that are congruent with what it is that they're wearing, it doesn't really bother me that much. If you're, decked out in full military gear and you're standing there shooting like Ruger 10/22 at pop cans, I am not as interested in what it is that you have going on. Your intent is not matching your actions at that point, or your intent is not matching your gear at that point. It's kind of a little side quest there that we're going to get off of now. So we've seen all kinds of trends pop up over the years. Suppressors have stuck around for so long that it's finally gotten to the point where people seem to be getting tax stamps back the same week. I had a coworker of mine who literally put in for it on Monday, had it before Friday. It was fantastic on a Form 4. That's insanely fast when you consider a couple of years ago it was like 13 months at a minimum in order to be able to get your tax stamp back for your suppressor. And then of course like night vision and all that kind of stuff. Now the concealed carry aspect of the Second Amendment really saw some changes in the last 20 years. If we go back 30, 40 years, concealed carry was characterized by, some fella walking around in a fishing jacket or a fishing vest and a 1911 on his hip. And you can see that still in IDPA. Trust me, I see it every month. As well as perhaps like a snub-nosed revolver on their ankle or something like a Beretta Jetfire in their pocket. That was like high concealed carry at the time. You bounce forward into the 2000s, you get past like the assault weapons ban and all that kind of stuff. Concealed carry starts to really take a change, and a lot of that change gets heavily influenced by women deciding that they want to partake in the Second Amendment, that they want to defend themselves and all that kind of stuff, which I am really excited anytime somebody who is considered high threat decides that they're going to take control of their own defense, that they're going to be responsible for their own defense. I think that's one of the neatest things about the Second Amendment, because that is who the Second Amendment is made for. Those who need something to be able to level the playing field with an opponent. That is why I love the Second Amendment. Again, another little rabbit hole there. We're going to get back on track here. So we see a lot of changes in the Second Amendment moving forward. In the Second Amendment, when it comes to concealed carry moving forward, we get away from, for the most part, we get away from outside the waistband carry, which, if you want to talk about open carry, that's a completely separate video that I'm more than willing to indulge in at a later date. However, what we see also are a change to how people conceal. So we start seeing people wearing flannels or button-up shirts, perhaps t-shirts, and then wearing underneath that garment at starting out the 3 to 4 o'clock position, and then eventually segueing into the appendix. And of course, people are looking for guns that suit that type of carry position Well, and what they wind up, or what the market provides, becomes slimline, micro-compact 9mm handguns in the form of starting off with the Keltec PF9 in like 2006, followed up by the Ruger LCP. No, excuse me, I keep wanting to say LCP. LC9 in like 2011, the Glock 42, which is a 380 offering and is kind of reflected previously in the Colt Mustang, but that is another option that comes out of this time period. And 380s are also impacted by the discussion that we're having here today. That comes out in like 2014-ish. Glock 43 comes out in 2015-ish. And then we have like the M&P Shield, Walther PPS, so on and so forth. Manufacturers start off this little arms race trying to create a slimline, micro-compact 9mm for this emerging concealed carry demographic in not just women but also men, and it's a really wonderful time. Smith & Wesson's practically giving away M&P 9 shields. There's a ton of videos comparing the pros and cons of the 43 versus everything else in the market and all that kind of stuff, and you just see this fervor get built, and everything's going super well up until the SIG P365 comes onto the scene. And this changes everything, because now you have a gun that's pretty much the same size as any of these other micro compacts, but it carries 10 rounds instead of capping out at 8 rounds in a flush fit magazine with a 12-round extendable. Flips the concealed carry market on its ear. And even though the SIG P365 had a lot of teething issues, because as it turns out in recent years, SIG has decided that product testing is best done on the market instead of like in controlled settings on a range or in a laboratory before they unveil the product, which is a completely different subject for a completely different time. This touches off another arms race where now Glock comes out with a 43X, Springfield Armory comes out with a Hellcat, you know, Smith & Wesson comes out with the M&P Shield Plus and all this kind of stuff, and on and on and on. And now there are a lot of people out there who are stating that there is zero reason to buy a single-digit capacity micro-compact 9mm when you have so many double-digit capacity offerings out there on the market. And that's what we're going to explore here today. We're going to address whether or not it's completely pointless to purchase something in a single-digit capacity in a micro-compact 9mm. So I have a couple of guns here that we're going to be able to kind of use as our talking points, starting off with this Smith & Wesson M&P 9 Shield, chambered 9mm. The Shield has been previously reviewed on the channel, link in the description. However, this is not that gun. I'm actually borrowing this off of a coworker who was planning on letting it go, and I decided that I would go ahead and do this video while I still had access to the gun. So that's going to represent our slimline single stack micro compact offering. And then we also have this Glock 43X chambered in 9mm to represent the double-digit capacity micro-compact 9mm. Now, a couple caveats to get out of the way right off the bat here, guys. Neither one of these are necessarily the most sterling examples of the smallest guns in their categories. However, since neither one of them are the best example, I kind of feel like we're still doing kind of an apples-to-apples comparison at this point. A Glock 43 would probably be more relevant against the Glock 43X. I just don't have access to a 43 right now. But it is on my list, and we'll get into that more here in a bit. In addition to that, the owner of this gun, for some reason, doesn't have the 7-round magazine that would have come with this firearm. Instead, has 3 8-round magazines. So that's going to play a little bit of a portion in this conversation as well moving forward. All right, guys, so why don't we go ahead and start off with the most obvious comparison and get into size. So for this, I'm going to drop this 8-round capacity magazine. Now we can see here we have this little protrusion here on the heel of the butt. That is where the 7-round flush fit magazine would line up at. So that still gives us a good focus point for this comparison. So I'm going to get the tops of the slides together here as best I can. The slide releases are getting in the way. Okay, so as we can see here, the Glock 43X is slightly longer than what the flush fit Smith & Wesson would be. Just a little bit, not a lot, especially when you consider that it holds 3 more rounds than, well, 2 more rounds. 3 more rounds. Yeah, math is apparently difficult today. Holds 3 more rounds than what the flush fit magazine would allow the M&P Shield to hold. And then when I add, lining these up properly, when I add the 8-round magazine, these are very difficult to get lined up properly. Okay, the 43X just barely edges out. It's just barely longer. Hardly even worth talking about. Barely longer than the M&P Shield. Now, when it comes to length of the slide and all that kind of stuff, the guns are incredibly comparable. When it comes to thickness, so they are the same thickness when it comes to the grip. Pretty much the same thickness when it comes to the grip. However, the slide on the M&P Shield is fatter. So this is a slightly wider gun than the 43X. And keep in mind, guys, Glocks in general, in any category that they are in, they are the smallest option out there. Glock has always built on what are considered to be 9mm frames for pretty much all their guns with the 40 and the 10mm, or excuse me, with the 10mm and the 45. I'm thinking Glock 40 when I said 10mm. Regardless, they've always been the slimmest option around. So if you compare if you do an apples to apples comparison with anything else in the Glock's same weight class, it's always going to come in lighter, thinner, smaller, all that kind of stuff. And we see that here with the M&P Shield. So maybe that's where this is a little bit of an unfair comparison. But if I had a Shield Plus, we'd be doing it that way. Okay, so dimensions-wise, the two guns are very close, but this is slightly smaller, technically. Okay, well, what about weight-wise? So, I took these two guns, loaded them up with one in the chamber, and then also I only put 7 rounds in this gun because I think that's where the more relevant comparison is at, and I'll explain that here in a second, and I placed them on the scale. This gun is roughly an ounce lighter than the Glock 43X. Not that big of a difference. Now, why did you not compare against 8 rounds, Murph? Because I think one of the advantages of this gun is being able to make it slightly smaller than the 43X. So I think the 7-round capacity gun is more interesting to me in the comparison than the 8-rounder. Now, of course, I'm stuck with the 8-rounder, which these are steel mags, so these add weight. So this is not necessarily the most perfect of comparisons, but we can extrapolate that there's probably not going to be more than 2 ounces difference between these two guns weight-wise. Okay, well, at this point, we're looking at a lot of things that are kind of pointing at the 43X being so marginally different that is it really unfair to say that this completely outclasses this handgun? That's where things get difficult. Now keep in mind, guys, this entire conversation is based on context and nuance, and this is a contextual and nuance channel. So somebody's sitting down and saying, well, you know, Glock 43X carries 10 rounds plus 1, and, you know, you can only get 8 plus 1 out of the M&P Shield. So the Glock wins because it holds more rounds. That is so lacking in context for a wide variety of reasons. More is not always better. And you see this all the time in the firearms community, especially when it comes to ammunition. Oh, well, this one carries more rounds, therefore it must be better. Okay, well, you know, hey, Bob, you're sitting there talking about, you know, a 22 long rifle. Okay, so is it better for what in this case? Self-defense? Absolutely not. It is passable. I'm not even going to say acceptable. It is passable for self-defense given the right set of circumstances, but that does not make it a good choice for self-defense at that point. Oh, well, you know, this projectile has a higher velocity. This loading has a higher velocity than this one over here. Therefore, velocity is king. Velocity is what it is that we should be pursuing. We want higher numbers in velocity. Okay, well, you know what? That bullet, it might be really fast, but it also gets moved around by wind because it's super light, and that's not going to be a good option for me if I'm trying to reach out to greater distances. Or perhaps that bullet has a blunted shape, so it starts off with a very high initial velocity, but it loses velocity very rapidly, giving it a rainbow-like trajectory over distance. That's nuance. That's context. You can't just look at the numbers. Same thing with size. Oh, well, this bullet is bigger, therefore it is better. You know, that's the whole basis of the 9mm versus 45 debate. However, there are so many more things that impact the performance, the ballistic performance of a bullet, especially when you talk about it in media. Once it penetrates the body, once it starts expanding and doing all the things that it's supposed to do. It's not just a simple matter of those numbers are higher, therefore they are better. That's the same thing in this conversation between these two guns as well. Because that same person who's talking about, you know, this gun or SIG P365 or Springfield Armory Hellcat, they're looking at the higher capacity versions, just like as we can see with my coworker who only has the 8-rounders for the Shield. People want more rounds in the gun, and I know lots of people who when these guns were popular, when they were still, you know, the it thing on the market, they preferred to carry the 8-round magazine because it gave them more grip. However, if you're basing this entirely, if your concealed carry options are entirely based around the size of your hand, that is your limitation for carry. And that's going to have a lot of impacts on other things, because at that point, you don't have as many options, especially whenever it is that we're talking about effective concealed carry, which means that nobody knows that you're carrying. So if everybody knows that you're carrying, you're not concealed anymore. So if your hand is the restriction for that, then you wind up carrying larger and larger guns, or you're going to wind up carrying a larger firearm than perhaps the situation that you're in, which is going to cause you to print, which is going to cause you to be identified as carrying a firearm, and could cause you issues long term. Or actually in the short term in that case. So like the Glock 43, the Walther PPS, those were advocated for as great summer carry guns. You know, your winter, you carry your Glock 19 or something along those lines, and then summer hits, you want something a little bit lighter so that you can carry a t-shirt. These guns would be a really great option for that. Given the dimensions that we've already looked at, does that make this gun a terrible choice for that type of thing? No. Up until you decided that more is better. Hi, Leia. We're having a tiff right now. She scratched me by accident, and I yelled at her, and now she wants to be friends, but she doesn't want to be friends. Like, we haven't made up yet. All right. So, is this going to suddenly make it so that you're not able to carry? Well, it depends on how it is that you impact that. If you're going to stick with more is better, because Shield Arms makes 15-round flush-fit magazines for this handgun, and they make a 20-round extended magazine. And I've known guys who've carried Shield Arms magazines because, wow, I get the small compact gun and now I've got all these bullets. However, the more bullets you add, the more you change your weight dynamic at that point. That's potentially a problem, especially since it compromises you being able to wear light clothing, like, you know, doing the summer gun thing where you're wearing shorts and a light t-shirt or something along those lines. That's going to complicate how well this thing sticks in your waistband at that point. And I think that's one of the big issues whenever it is that we have this discussion. As we add more ammunition, we add more weight. And that may make this gun prohibitive to carry, to effective carry, because the gun you have is the one that matters. And one of the greatest paradoxes whenever it is that we talk about concealed carry is that when I'm carrying the gun, it can't be light enough. It can't be small or light enough. But when I'm fighting with the gun, it can't possibly be big enough. And that's the dynamic that we have to work through whenever we talk about this stuff. You spend way more time carrying your handgun than you do fighting with it for the average person, especially whenever it is you're talking about concealed carry. Most people will never have to use their firearm in a concealed carry situation. They will carry it more often, however, because of the slim possibility that you might have to use it. That's why I carry a gun. Not because I expect it, not because I'm getting in a shootout every day, but because I know that I could. That as I go about my daily life, that I could run into a situation where I have to utilize a firearm in self-defense. And having already come through defensive encounters previously, I understand that I want to be ready should that circumstance arise, even though it's a low probability of it happening to me more than once in my life. So with that being the case, something that's a little bit lighter and a little bit smaller is a little bit more likely to actually be on you should that situation arise. You're one of the guys who are like, yeah, man, I carry a Desert Eagle, no big deal, 58, blah, 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 blah. And you're like, sick, dude, you got it on you right now? And the answer is probably no, because that's a big, heavy gun, and it's really hard to hide. So it's likely, at best, in their truck. More than likely, it's at home in the safe. So when you run into circumstances, this is really where the Glock 42 comes in, which if you're interested in the Glock 42, previously reviewed on the channel, link in the description. The Glock 42 or a Glock 43, the M&P Shield, you're just like, man, I just need to run down to the gas station real quick because I need to grab a six-pack, or I just need like an energy drink or something along those lines. You're not necessarily going to want to, maybe, and this depends on the individual, but you may not want to mess around and grab your Glock 19, this being a Glock 19M, to take with you to the store, especially because, like, maybe you're in boxers. Well, not boxers. That'd be a poor choice. You probably want to wear more clothing than that. But you might be in basketball shorts or a very light attire. You know, that might make something like a Glock 19 or a steel-framed gun of some sort not very viable. But something smaller, like a Glock 43 or the M&P Shield, is something that would actually fit that situation, still have you armed, still have you with 6 to 8 rounds available to you and still present in the low probability that you actually have to use the gun. So that's why I say that the conversation when we just talk about capacity lacks a lot of context. Now, I did take these two guns out to the range because why not? You know, I have them. I got a bunch of 9mm lying around. Let's go ahead and take them out. And when it came to shooting, the two guns performed very similarly.
You got 10? Yeah.
I would say that they have equal snappiness and all that kind of stuff. This one I actually shot slightly better today, which I was kind of surprised. I was shooting at 14 yards at like 2-inch target pasties, and I was actually hitting them with this. Whereas with the 43X, I was having some trouble connecting on those particular targets. Now, also, a lot of times people talk about like, well, with the flush fits and stuff like that, then I don't have anywhere for my pinky to go, and that's really annoying. And that's something that I never understood, because again, we're now restricting the size of the gun to the size of your hand. Your ability to conceal a gun to the size of your hand. I don't necessarily think that's a good practice to begin with. But in addition to that, I used to have that same kind of complaint, specifically with the Glock 19, because this being a 19M, it still has the cutout in the front that the original Gen 5s had. And when I first picked up the Gen 5s, I did not like that cutout, and I did not like the flared magazine well, because they both kind of disturbed my grip. However, over the years, as I've gone to courses and as I've gone to like competitions and stuff like that, I have started keeping my bottom fingers more loose. So my bottom fingers on my shooting hand don't have as much to do with recoil management for me, for how it is that I shoot. Because whenever I do that, whenever I do use them to grip the gun, I wind up dipping the muzzle a little bit when I shoot. So that's the same kind of thing with a flush fit magazine on an M&P Shield. That's not a big deal to me. I keep this pinky and these bottom fingers loose anyway. They don't play a big part in what it is that I'm doing to begin with. It doesn't bother me for them to be hanging off. And I definitely notice that now whenever I shoot the Glock 19 Gen 5, or this 19M specifically that still has the cutout, I don't notice that cutout. But the very first time I ever picked one up, I noticed it big time. So the one thing that I will say for having a slightly longer grip, in this case this is very specific to the 43X, is that it does at least give me more surface area to help in mitigating recoil, and we can see that with the flush fit as well. But when we're talking about carry, which is what I'm still doing more often, the 7-rounder makes sense, and having this as a backup mag is like the original intent for why they were provided in that way. One 7-rounder, one 8-rounder. Okay. I think that pretty much covers. Well, why don't we go ahead and get into the conclusions portions here, guys? I'm kind of rambling at this point, so let's just go ahead and start tying this up. Something like a SIG P365 coming in at pretty much the exact same size as a Glock 43, running a little bit more narrow in the grip, which is why I never cared for the SIG P365. Is a very compelling argument that something like a slimline 9mm is dead. And that's why like Smith & Wesson has discontinued the 2.0 Shield in favor of the Shield Plus. So I can understand that being evidence or being used as evidence for why it is that this classification of firearm is on its way out. However, I would not say obsolete is the right answer. I would not tell you that you need to go and get rid of your M&P Shield right off the bat because the SIG P365 exists. What I would say is that having this as an option available to you is still helpful. So if you're in a situation where you like, man, I really don't I don't want to have a bunch of different guns and all that kind of stuff, then yeah, sure. Go ahead and get rid of your micro compact, single digit capacity handgun in order to be able to go and run out and buy the bigger brother version of it with the higher capacity. That's completely fine. I understand what it is that you're saying there. But if you're like me and you want You don't dress to the gun, so you need lots of options available to make sure that you're armed in all circumstances. You still benefit from having a slimline 9mm or 380 or both, honestly. So like for me, the big advantage with the Glock 42 and why I want another Glock 42 or a Glock 43 is because if I'm dressed nicely, if I'm wearing slacks, I'm dressed up for a wedding or something along those lines, I still want to be armed. At that point, I need something much smaller than a Glock 19 or an M11A1 or anything along those lines, because those pants are not cut for concealed carry, and I still want to look good in my outfit, but I also want to be armed. So something that's smaller and slimmer and lighter is going to be more sustainable for me to be armed in those scenarios, and that's what matters to me the most. So I want to look nice, but I want to look nice. I want to have well-fitted clothing and all that kind of stuff, but I also still want to carry. That's where these slimline 380 and 9mm caliber handguns really start to shine. So obsolete? Absolutely not. Niche? Absolutely. That's the contextual aspect of this conversation. All right, guys, I think that pretty much covers my thoughts on this particular subject. I hope you guys found this interesting, and that's pretty much what I got. Have a good day.